The moment she spoke, the great hall fell silent. Ines, a woman accustomed to being overlooked, had just contradicted the most powerful man in the county, a man rumored to be ancient, immortal, and impossibly cruel. She was a book restorer, a creature of dust and forgotten paper, while he was Lord Valerius, master of Blackwood Manor, a fortress of spires and shadows that clawed at the sky. He had summoned the nation's finest scholars to restore his legendary library, and they had all offered him flattery and grandeur. Only Ines had offered him the truth. She had seen the ruin in his library not as an ending, but as a beginning. But what no one knew was that in seeing the secret story hidden in the ash and water stain of a burned book, she had accidentally read the first line of a letter written to his heart 300 years ago. And for the first time in 300 years, he felt something stir in the frozen dust of his own. If you believe that being truly seen is the most powerful magic of all, type "I see you" below, and let me tell you what happened next. It started on a night when the autumn wind was sharp enough to cut. To understand how Ines found herself in that great, cold hall, you need to know that she was a woman born of quiet things. The scent of old leather and drying paste, the whisper of a turning page, the precise, patient scratch of a bone folder scoring a crease. Her world was her small workshop, a room above a bustling London street where the city's roar was muffled by stacks of decaying books that waited for her gentle hands to grant them a second life. Ines was a restorer, not a grand binder of new volumes for wealthy patrons, but a healer of the broken and forgotten. She mended torn pages with tissues as fine as a dragonfly's wing. She coaxed faded ink back from the brink of invisibility. She stitched spines with the care of a surgeon. She loved the stories held not just in the words, but in the paper itself. The thumb smudge on a beloved passage, the faint floral scent of a pressed flower, the tear stain on a final, heartbreaking page. This love was not shared by her family. To them, her work was a source of mild embarrassment. It was a dusty, unprofitable hobby, not a profession. Her mother wished she would marry. Her father wished she would do, well, anything else. The pinnacle of their disappointment had come 6 months prior, at a gathering of the Royal Antiquarian Society. Her cousin, Mr. Alistair Finch, a man whose ambition was as polished and hard as his shoes, was presenting a paper. Alistair was everything Ines was not: loud, confident, and celebrated. He had recently acquired a small collection of local letters and, knowing Ines's skill with damaged documents, had condescendingly allowed her to clean them up for him. While working on them, Ines had discovered something remarkable. Beneath the mundane correspondence, she found evidence of a second, invisible ink. A secret story of espionage and betrayal from a long-forgotten conflict. She had excitedly told Alistair, showing him her meticulous notes and the chemical traces. He had smiled a thin, dismissive smile. And then, in front of the entire assembled society, he had used her discovery as a punchline. He spoke of the fanciful interpretations of amateur enthusiasts, describing how a female relative had imagined a romantic spy story in what was obviously just mildew and water damage. He did not name her, but everyone knew. The room had chuckled. Ines had felt herself shrink, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like it might sear her skin. She had never spoken of it again. The wound wasn't just the humiliation. It was the confirmation of her deepest fear, that she saw things no one else did, and that this perception made her not special, but foolish. She retreated deeper into her workshop, into the silent company of her books, where the stories were true and her work was valued, if only by her. Then came the summons from Lord Valerius. It was the talk of every university and society in the country. The reclusive lord of Blackwood Manor, a man of staggering wealth and shadowy lineage, was opening his ancestral library. The collection was the stuff of legend, but it had been ravaged by a fire and subsequent water damage over a century ago. A competition was announced. The most esteemed restorers and academics were invited to the manor to assess the collection and submit a proposal for its complete restoration. The winner would receive a commission that would secure their name in history. Alistair was determined to win, and for that, despite his contempt for her, he needed Ines. He arrived at her workshop one afternoon, his presence too large and loud for the quiet space. He didn't ask, he informed. She would accompany him to Blackwood. He needed her eye for detail, her technical knowledge of paper decay and chemical treatments, to create an unimpeachable proposal. Of course, he'd said, gesturing around her sanctuary with a flick of his wrist. You'll receive a small stipend for your time. It will be a good opportunity for you to see how real scholarly work is conducted. The old shame pricked at her, but the word library was a lure she couldn't resist. The Blackwood collection, even in its ruined state, the thought of it made her hands ache with longing. She agreed, telling herself it was for the books, not for Alistair. The journey to Blackwood was a descent into a different world. The city gave way to rolling hills, then to dense, ancient forests that crowded the road, their branches seeming to snatch at the carriage wheels. The air grew colder. Finally, through a veil of mist, the manor appeared. It was not a house. It was a geological formation, a jagged outcrop of black stone and Gothic spires that seemed to drain the light from the sky. The carriage wheels crunched on gravel that sounded like bone. Inside, the air was still and frigid. A funereal silence pressed in on them. They were led into the great hall, a cavernous space where their footsteps echoed like gunshots. Tapestries thick with the dust of ages depicted grim, forgotten battles. At the far end of the hall, on a throne-like chair carved from black wood, sat Lord Valerius. He was unnaturally still, more statue than man. His face was a mask of aristocratic beauty, all sharp angles and pale skin, framed by hair as black as a raven's wing. But his eyes were the most arresting feature. They were dark, polished obsidian, and they seemed to absorb all the light in the room, reflecting nothing back. He watched the assembled group of a dozen scholars, restorers, and academics approach, his expression one of profound, ancient boredom. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Alistair, ever confident, stepped forward and began to speak, his voice booming with practiced authority. Others followed, each trying to outdo the last with grand pronouncements about their methods, their reputations, their vision for the library. Ines stayed at the back of the group, feeling small and out of place, a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Lord Valerius listened to them all without a word, his stillness absolute. When the last scholar had finished his pompous speech, a heavy silence fell. Then the Lord spoke, and his voice was like smoke and old wine, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the hall. "You speak of restoration," he said, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and dismissive. "Show me." He rose in a single fluid motion and led them through a series of dark, echoing corridors to a pair of immense, iron-bound doors. With a touch, he swung them open, and a wave of scent washed over them. Cold ash, damp stone, decay. The Blackwood Library was a cathedral of sorrow. Vast, vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness, and what had once been miles of shelves were now skeletal, charred remains. Heaps of burned and waterlogged books lay in sodden piles on the floor. Soot coated every surface like a black velvet shroud. It was a scene of utter devastation. A collective gasp went through the group. Alistair and the others began to walk through the wreckage, their voices hushed but excited, pointing out salvageable sections, discussing the costs of rebinding, the challenges of sourcing period-appropriate materials. They saw a project, a challenge, a prize to be won. Ines saw a graveyard. She felt a profound ache of loss for the stories that were gone forever. She broke away from the group, drawn to a less damaged corner where a single large folio lay open on a lectern, as if someone had been reading it when the disaster struck. Its pages were buckled from water and blackened with soot, the script a ghostly smudge. The others had already dismissed it as a total loss. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the page. She didn't touch it. She just looked. Her gaze traced the patterns of the damage, the way the water had bled the ink, the way the heat had curled the vellum. And then she saw it. Beneath the primary layer of faded black ink, beneath the soot and the water stains, was another text. It was fainter, a ghost of a script in a different hand, written in a ferrous, brownish ink that had reacted differently to the heat. The fire and water had not just destroyed the top layer of writing. They had, in a strange chemical reaction, made the hidden layer beneath fractionally more visible. It was a palimpsest, a document where the original writing had been washed or scraped off, and a new text written over it. But the ghost of the first text remained. "It's not just gone," she whispered to herself, her breath a small white cloud in the cold air. "It's changed. There's something else here." A shadow fell over her. A sudden, intense chill wrapped around her, making the hairs on her arms stand up. She hadn't heard anyone approach. "What do you see?" The voice was Lord Valerius's, spoken from directly behind her. It was so quiet, it was almost a thought, yet it cut through the cavernous space. Ines jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to find him standing there, a pillar of darkness against the library's gloom. His obsidian eyes were fixed on her, no longer bored, but filled with a sharp, unnerving intensity. She swallowed, her throat dry. "My lord," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "The others, they see destruction. They see what was lost." She gestured to the ruined folio. "But the damage, it isn't an ending. The heat and the water, they acted like a wash. They've revealed something that was hidden underneath. Another story." He didn't speak. He simply stared at her, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, she thought she saw a flicker of deep crimson in the black of his eyes, like embers glowing in a dying fire. The silence stretched, sharp enough to cut. He was looking at her as if he had never seen a human being before. He was looking at her as if she were a key he had lost centuries ago. Then he moved. He turned to face the stunned group of academics who had fallen silent, watching the exchange. "Leave," he said. The word was not loud, but it held the absolute authority of a king. Alistair sputtered, stepping forward. "My lord, I must protest. We have not yet had the chance to present our formal proposals. My assistant here is inexperienced." Lord Valerius's head turned slowly, and he fixed Alistair with a look of such profound, ancient coldness that Alistair physically recoiled. "I have seen all I need to see," Valerius said, his gaze sliding back to Ines. It was a look of possession, of decision. "You," he said to her, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "You will have the commission. You alone." The hall was filled with the sound of indrawn breaths. Ines's own heart felt like it had stopped. Her? Alone? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "That is preposterous!" Alistair's voice was high with indignation. "She is nobody! She works for me! This is my project!" Lord Valerius took a single silent step toward him. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to deepen, to pool and writhe like spilled ink. "She is the only one who saw," he stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The rest of you are blind. Now get out of my house." His eyes held Alistair's, and for a second, the crimson flare was unmistakable. Alistair went pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He turned and fled, the other scholars scrambling after him like frightened mice. Ines was left alone in the vast, ruined library with the silent, imposing Lord of Blackwood. The iron doors boomed shut behind on the fleeing academics, sealing her inside. She was his. The project was hers. She had been seen, and she was terrified. A new life began for Ines that day. She was given a suite of rooms in the manor's east wing, a place of faded grandeur, with towering, mullioned windows that overlooked a garden of skeletal roses and weeping statues. The rooms were cold, impeccably clean, and profoundly lonely. Her few belongings, brought from her small London workshop, looked meager and lost in the cavernous bedroom. But the library became her world. It was a daunting, overwhelming task. By day, she worked methodically, cataloging the damage, setting up a makeshift workshop in the most stable section. She established systems for drying the damp pages, for cleaning the soot, for stabilizing the brittle paper. The scale of it was the work of a lifetime. Lord Valerius was a ghostly presence. Days would pass when she would not see him at all. Then she would look up from her work and find him standing in the shadows at the far end of the room, watching her. He never made a sound. The only sign of his presence was the unnerving drop in temperature, a cold that sank into her bones. The candles on her work table would often gutter and flicker as he drew near, as if the air itself grew thin around him. She tried not to be afraid. She focused on the work. She found a rhythm in the patient, meticulous tasks, and slowly, a strange comfort settled in. In this vast, silent house, under the watchful gaze of its unnerving master, she was not dismissed. Her work was not a hobby. It was essential. It was the only thing that mattered. Her focus returned again and again to the folio on the lectern, the one that had first captured her attention. It became her personal project, the puzzle she worked on late into the night, long after her other tasks were done for the day. Using delicate solvents and a magnifying glass, she began the painstaking process of trying to lift the surface ink and reveal the ghost beneath. One night, weeks into her stay, she had a breakthrough. She managed to fully uncover a small, intact fragment of the hidden text. Her heart pounded as she leaned in, her lamp casting a warm pool of light on the vellum. The script was elegant, feminine, and it was not a historical record. It was a letter. A love letter. "My dearest," it read, "the rain has kept me indoors all day, and my only solace is the thought of you. Do you recall the day we met in the rain, and you claimed a single drop on my cheek was a diamond? I still feel the warmth of your hand where you brushed it away." A floorboard creaked behind her. Ines didn't startle this time. She had grown accustomed to his silent appearances. She felt the familiar chill settle over the room. "You have found her," Lord Valerius said. His voice was different. The cold, aristocratic edge was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Ines turned on her stool to face him. He had stepped out of the shadows and was standing in the soft glow of her work lamp. The light softened the harsh angles of his face, and for the first time, she saw not just an imposing lord, but a man burdened by an immense, ancient sorrow. "Her?" Ines asked softly. He gestured to the folio. "The library. It is not merely a collection of books. It is my memory, my history." He paused, his gaze distant, lost in a century she couldn't imagine. The fire was not an accident. It was set by an enemy long ago. He sought to burn my past, to erase every trace of my mortal life, to unmake me. He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the restored fragment of the letter. But he failed. "These letters, they are from my wife, Lyra, written in the last year of my human life." He looked at Ines, and his eyes were dark pools of grief. "I thought them lost forever. But you saw what I could not. The fire and water that I believed had destroyed her words forever. Instead, they revealed her secrets. She was a meticulous letter writer. She would draft her thoughts, her secret feelings, on the page before washing the vellum and writing the final, more formal version over the top. The fire, it didn't destroy. It uncovered her true heart. The pieces clicked into place for Ines. The commission, his intense focus on her, his dismissal of the other, more famous restorers. It wasn't about the library at all. It was about this. "You want me to restore these letters," she said, her voice filled with dawning understanding. "I need you to," he corrected her, his voice tight with emotion. "I have not been able to read her words for 300 years. My grief, it is a poison. The pages crumble at my touch. My own nature decays the memory I wish to preserve. I need your hands, your skill. I need you to give me back the only untainted thing I have left." He stood before her, the powerful, terrifying Lord Valerius, stripped bare. He was not a monster from a storybook. He was a being trapped in an eternity of loss, reaching out for the one person who could possibly heal a wound centuries old. He was asking her to touch the most sacred part of his soul. Would you have stayed, knowing that to do so meant immersing yourself in the deepest, most dangerous grief of an ancient king? Tell me in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, join this family. Ines looked from his face, etched with a pain so profound it seemed to have shaped the very lines of it, to the delicate, ghostly script on the page. She thought of her own small life, of being dismissed and invisible, and she thought of this immense, timeless love, trapped and silenced by tragedy. Her own wounds seemed insignificant in comparison. Here was a story that desperately needed to be saved. Here was a ghost that needed a voice, and she, Ines, was the only one who could provide it. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm in the silent library. "I will." A pact was sealed in that moment, not of employer and employee, but of something far deeper, a sacred trust. Her work shifted. The general restoration of the library continued by day, but her nights were devoted to Lyra's letters. The folio became an altar in the center of the vast, dark room, and the dynamic between them changed. He was no longer just a silent observer. He became a participant in the ritual. He would sit in a chair near her work table, a figure of stillness in the flickering candlelight. And as she worked, he would talk. He told her about Lyra. Not grand tales of their life at court or epic romances, but small, perfect, intimate things. He told her how Lyra would hum off-key when she was arranging flowers. He described the way she would bite her lip when she was concentrating, just as Ines herself often did. He spoke of the scent of lavender and rain that always clung to her hair. He was not just remembering a wife, he was resurrecting a soul piece by piece with his words. And Ines, with her patient hands and chemical solutions, was resurrecting the proof of that soul. In turn, she found herself opening up to him. She spoke of her love for the forgotten corners of history, for the quiet lives hidden in the margins of grand narratives. She told him about her family's disappointment, and one night, the story of Alistair's public humiliation came tumbling out, the shame still sharp and fresh. He listened with that unnerving, total stillness. When she finished, a bitter tear tracking down her cheek, he said nothing for a long moment. Then his voice was low and resonant. "He is a fool, a man who mistakes noise for substance. He looks at a diamond and sees only a rock." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers across the table. "Your skill is not a craft, Ines. It is a form of communion. You give voice to ghosts. There is no higher calling." No one had ever spoken of her work that way. No one had ever spoken of her that way. He saw the very thing in her that others had mocked, and he named it sacred. A warmth bloomed in her chest, a strange and unfamiliar feeling. The nights grew longer and colder as winter deepened. The manor was encased in snow and silence. The library became their entire world. One evening, after hours spent meticulously tracing a near-invisible line of script, Ines's right hand seized up in a painful cramp. She gasped, dropping her fine-tipped brush. Before she could even think to flex her fingers, he was there. He moved from his chair to her side in a silent, fluid motion that was still startling. "Allow me," he murmured. He took her hand in his. His skin was shockingly cold, like marble, but his grip was exquisitely gentle. With an impossible tenderness, his long, cool fingers began to massage her palm, her wrist, the aching joints of her fingers. The touch was not romantic, not yet, but it was the most profoundly intimate gesture she had ever experienced. He was tending to her, caring for the instrument of his salvation. He held her hand as if it were made of spun glass, his head bowed, his focus absolute. Ines's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the strange, still energy that radiated from him, a deep, quiet power. He saw her not as a woman to be courted, but as a soul to be revered. And in that moment, that felt more like love than any poem or kiss she had ever imagined. He began to show her his own vulnerabilities, too. The shadows in the manor, she came to understand, were extensions of him. When his grief was particularly sharp, they would writhe at the edges of the light, pooling in the corners like living things, their edges sharp and menacing. They were his sorrow, his rage, his loneliness made manifest. She was never afraid of them. When they grew too active, she would simply rise and light another branch of candles, pushing the darkness back with her small, steady flame. Her quiet courage in the face of his darkness was a balm to him. She did not flinch from his nature. She simply made more room for the light. The breakthrough came on the night of the winter solstice. After weeks of painstaking work, She had fully restored the first complete letter. The vellum was smooth, the ghost script clear and legible in the lamplight. He was sitting in his usual chair, watching her. She looked up, her heart pounding. "It's done," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The first one is complete." He rose and came to stand beside her, looking down at the page. He did not reach for it. "Read it to me," he commanded softly. "I wish to hear it in a living voice." Ines took a breath and began to read. Lyra's voice, silent for 3 centuries, filled the library. It was a letter full of simple, joyful love, describing a walk they had taken, her playful frustration with his somber moods, her deep, unwavering certainty in their shared future. It was a portrait of a woman so vibrant, so alive, that it was impossible to believe she was gone. When Ines read the final line, "You are my anchor in this world, and I am the sail that will carry you to joy," her voice cracked with emotion. She looked up at him. A single dark tear was tracing a path through the pale, perfect marble of his cheek. It was a startling, human sight. He seemed utterly undone. He reached out, his cold fingers impossibly gentle, and touched her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, a mirror of the gesture Lyra had described in her letter. "You have her voice," he whispered, his own voice thick with unshed centuries of grief. But his eyes, as they met hers, held more than just the memory of his lost wife. They held a dawning, terrifying, beautiful new light. The longing of 300 years was still there, but it was slowly, irrevocably, beginning to refocus on her. On Ines. The quiet rhythm of their life was shattered by the arrival of a letter from the outside world. It was from Ines's mother, a frantic, worried screed. Alistair Finch had not taken his humiliation quietly. Consumed by a venomous jealousy, he had been spreading vicious rumors. He painted a picture of a mad, reclusive lord and a captive, bewitched girl. He was spinning a narrative of rescue, casting himself as the hero who would save his poor, naive cousin from the clutches of a monster. Ines crumpled the letter, a cold dread seeping into her. She knew Alistair. His pride was a dangerous, wounded animal. Valerius knew it too. He stood by the tall library window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. Though she knew his senses reached far beyond, to the village, to the city. "He will not stop at rumors," Valerius stated, his voice flat and hard. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a new and frightening energy. Men like him cannot abide being made to look small. They must burn down the world to feel tall again. His prediction came to pass less than a week later. On a grim, gray afternoon, the tolling of the church bell in the distant village began to ring with an erratic, urgent clamor. Valerius, who had been standing still as a statue for the better part of an hour, turned his head. "They are coming," he said. Ines ran to the window. In the distance, she could see a dark procession making its way up the long drive to the manor. A small mob, perhaps 24 men from the village and the local constabulary, led by the righteous, striding figure of Alistair Finch. They carried torches that smoked and sputtered in the damp air, and the glint of iron, pitchforks, axe heads, crowbars, was unmistakable. A terrifying transformation came over Valerius. The quiet, grieving man she had come to know vanished, replaced by the ancient predator. His stillness became absolute, the stillness of a panther before it strikes. His eyes were no longer dark. They were burning crimson, 2 points of hostile fire. The shadows in the library coiled and thickened, flowing towards him, clinging to his form like a living cloak. A low growl, a sound that was not human, vibrated in his chest. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a lethal rasp. "Bar the door. Do not, under any circumstances, come out." He intended to meet them. He intended to unmake them. She saw centuries of rage and power gathering in him, a storm about to break. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. He turned to her, his expression one of cold fury. "This is not a discussion, Ines. They have come to harm you. I will not allow it. And I will not allow you to become the monster he claims you are," she retorted, stepping in front of him, placing a hand on his chest. It was like touching a block of ice. "This is about me, too. He took my voice once. I will not let you take it from me now. I will not hide while you slaughter them. That is his victory, not ours." His crimson eyes blazed. The shadows writhed around them. "They carry iron. They mean to kill what they do not understand. And let me help them understand," she pleaded, her gaze locked on his. "Stand with me, not as a beast of the night, but as the lord of this manor. Let them see you as I see you. Trust me." The word hung in the air between them. Trust. For a being like him, it was a word of immense, almost impossible weight. The rage in his eyes warred with something else, something deeper. The shadows at his feet hissed and swirled, but they did not advance. He looked down at her, at this small, mortal woman who was not cowering from his power, but demanding he control it. Slowly, agonizingly, the crimson light in his eyes began to recede, banked like coals. The feral tension in his body eased, replaced by the familiar, regal stillness. He gave a single, sharp nod. Her courage, her refusal to be a damsel to be saved, had reached a part of him that even his grief had not touched. Together, they walked from the library, through the echoing great hall, and to the massive front doors. Valerius swung them open, and they stepped out onto the wide stone portico, into the cold, gray light of the dying afternoon. The mob was 50 yards away, a phalanx of fear and anger. At their head, Alistair stopped, his face a mask of theatrical triumph. "Ines, thank God! We've come to rescue you from this creature!" he bellowed. Ines stood at the top of the steps, poised and calm. Behind her, a pace back and a step higher, stood Lord Valerius. He was an imposing figure of black and white against the gray stone, his face impassive, his hands clasped behind his back. The shadows pooled at his feet on the top step, dark and deep, but they remained contained, a quiet testament to his immense control. He was not a monster. He was a king on his throne. This was the feared vampire king in his full glory, but tempered by a human plea. "I require no rescue, cousin," Ines called out, her voice carrying with surprising strength in the still air. Alistair's face faltered. This was not the frightened, weeping victim he had imagined. "He has bewitched you! You don't know what you're saying!" "Oh, I know exactly what I am saying. For the first time in my life, perhaps," she replied. She took a step down, closing the distance slightly. "You have come here with torches and iron, whipped into a frenzy by this man's lies, lies born of jealousy and a wounded pride." She looked past Alistair, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the villagers, men she recognized from the market, from the smithy. "You are being used. Lord Valerius has not harmed me. He has honored me. He has given me the most important work of my life, the preservation of your own county's history, the history that rots in this library. She turned her attention fully on Alistair, her eyes flashing with a fire he had never seen in her before. You stood before a room full of your peers and called my work sentimental nonsense. You dismissed me. You tried to make me invisible." She gestured behind her to the silent, powerful figure on the steps. "Lord Valerius looked at the same work you scorned, and he saw its value. He looked at a ruined library that you saw only as a path to fame and fortune, and he saw the soul within it. He saw the stories worth saving." Her voice dropped, becoming intensely personal, a blade aimed at Alistair's heart. "He looked at me, and he saw me." Her words, simple and true, struck the mob with the force of a physical blow. They looked from her quiet, dignified form to the sneering, furious face of Alistair, and then to the impossibly regal lord of the manor, who had not moved or spoken a single word. They suddenly saw the situation for what it was, the petty vengeance of a bitter man against a powerful nobleman. The righteous fire in their bellies turned to the cold ash of embarrassment. They began to lower their pitchforks and torches, murmuring amongst themselves, avoiding Alistair's frantic gaze. The mob dissolved. Men peeled away, turning back down the drive, their shoulders slumped in shame. Soon, only Alistair was left, standing alone in the gravel, his face mottled with rage and utter humiliation. He was exposed, his ambition and cruelty laid bare for all to see. Lord Valerius descended the steps in a slow, deliberate cadence. He did not spare a single glance for the sputtering, defeated Alistair. His eyes were only for Ines. He stopped before her, and in front of the last of the retreating villagers, he took her hand. He lifted it to his lips, his touch cold but reverent, a public seal on a private vow. "The Lady of Blackwood Manor has spoken," he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the grounds with unnatural clarity, a formal pronouncement, a claiming. It was the final nail in the coffin of Alistair's reputation and the public beginning of hers. A year passed. Winter gave way to spring, which ripened into a golden autumn. The Blackwood Library was transformed. Where there had been soot and decay, there was now order and warmth. The scent of ash had been replaced by the comforting aroma of beeswax, old paper, and Ines's specially mixed glues. Tall candelabras cast a gentle, steady light over restored shelves and neatly stacked folios. It was no longer a tomb, it was a sanctuary. Ines, too, was transformed. The hesitant, overlooked woman was gone. In her place was the chatelaine of Blackwood Manor, a woman who moved with a quiet, unshakable confidence. Her passion, once a source of shame, had become her strength. The manor and its ancient master had revealed her to herself. She and Valerius now existed in a state of peaceful, profound intimacy. The master-servant dynamic had long since evaporated, replaced by a partnership of two souls who had found their counterpart in the most unlikely of circumstances. He was the anchor, she was the sail. One evening, they stood together before the great lectern. The final letter from the folio was finished. Its vellum was creamy and whole, Lyra's secret script, a clear brown whisper on the page. Ines had completed her sacred trust. Valerius reached out and for the first time touched the restored pages himself. He ran his fingers over the script, and the paper did not crumble. The poison of his grief had been drawn. He could touch his past without destroying it. He looked at Ines, his dark eyes holding a universe of gratitude and a love that felt as ancient as the stars. "These pages hold the memory of a life that ended," he said, his voice low and soft. You gave that memory back to me. He paused, taking her hand. But you, Ines, you are the life that begins. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. We must speak of time, he said. Your time. It is a flickering flame against the vast darkness of mine. Every sunrise I see with you is a gift. Every sunset, a quiet theft. He was speaking of her mortality. He did not press. He did not demand. He simply laid the truth before her, a choice as stark and momentous as any in a fairy tale. I would not see this light go out, he confessed, his voice tight with an emotion he rarely showed. To live as I do is to walk a long and lonely road, but it is a road I no longer wish to walk alone. But the choice, it must be utterly and completely yours. I will love you for the length of your precious, fleeting life, or I will love you for all of time. Either way, I am yours. This was the question that had hung unspoken in the air between them for months. The final, irreversible step. To remain human, to live out her days and leave him to an eternity of renewed grief, or to join him in his endless night, to become like him, to become a consort to the legendary vampire king. Ines looked into his eyes, into the eyes of the man who had seen her when no one else had, who had valued what the world dismissed. He had given her a home, a purpose, and a love deeper than any ocean. He had vanquished her demons, both internal and external. He had taught her the true meaning of her own strength. She didn't need words to answer. She raised her hand and placed it flat against his chest, over the place where a human heart would beat. She felt only the profound, powerful stillness of his ancient being. This was her anchor. She rose on her toes, and he bent to meet her. She pressed her lips to his. It was not their first kiss, but it was their most profound. It was a kiss of acceptance, of promise, of a future chosen and shared. It was the closing of one story and the beginning of an eternal one. Her choice was made. In the quiet of the resurrected library, surrounded by the ghosts she had given voice to, her new life, her real life, was just beginning. For more stories where quiet strength conquers centuries of sorrow, and where being overlooked becomes the key to unlocking a kingdom, subscribe to Herb Files. So tell me, would you have stayed? Comment where you are listening from tonight. I stay up until my eyes burn to bring you these stories. If this one touched you, do not break my heart. Subscribe and I will see you in the next one.